Okay, I guess we can start in. Today is another of our Thursday sociological seminars, and we have Israel Waismel-Manor with us. He's a senior lecturer in a School of Political Science at the University of Haifa. He also was a visiting professor at Stanford University and Cornell University. His expertise is mostly political attitude formation and its effects on voting behavior, but also political behavior and political communication across campaigns and elections, mainly in the USA. His research was published in many reputable journals, for example, in Journal of Communication and also Public Opinion Quarterly. Some of his recent co-authorships are, for example, How Cyber Attacks Terrorize, Cortisol and Personal Insecurity Jump in the Wake of Cyber Attacks in Cyber Psychology, Behavior and Social Networking Journal, and also The Red Faces of Right-Wing and Left-Wing Politicians in International Journal of Public Opinion Research Journal. He was also featured in the media, like the New York Times and the Washington Times and the Huffington Post. And today he's going to talk about the ugly face of discrimination. So thank you for being with us.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. And it's nice to be back in the room. So my wife got to be first, as it should, and I'll try to follow their air hacked in some way. So I think first I want to clarify that I was asked by Alish to do something that's kind of uncommon, at least in academia, is that to review kind of my work over the last couple of years and not to go over one specific paper, to give you kind of an introductory to experiments that I use a lot and that are less common perhaps in Europe, but they're getting more and more popular also in the United States as well. And in Israel 10 years ago, if you would tell somebody in political science that you're doing an experiment, he would tell you, you have to go to the other department, it's called psychology, go there and don't come back. And we do regressions. And now, suddenly, experiments are everywhere and everybody likes them, and there's a new journal of, not just a new journal that came out about 8 years ago. We petitioned to start a new section in political science called experimental methods, and we have hundreds of members in a new journal. And just last week there was a new journal in public policy experiments. So it's getting some traction. And I'll use discrimination as kind of an overall topic, but I'll be happy at the end of my talk to also talk about cyber terrorism, and if you like to know how to terrorize your neighbors, we can go about it and do that. But for now, I'll start with this. So I would love to say that. I started this inquiry into discrimination out of some kind of very civic-minded idea that I really want to explore why people are discriminated against, and especially most people that when we deal with discrimination, we think about either gender or we talk about race, especially in the American context, it's about race. And lately it's about Latinos in America discriminated, not just blacks. But my interest in discrimination started from something much more trivial and perhaps less altruistic or less noble. It was from people like this. So why is handsome singer, some of you old enough remember him, and at least in his youth, Gott, right? So why Gott became 41 times the singer of the year for the Czech Republic, and poor David here, right? Michal David never got elected to the singer of the year. So I would say that it has to do something not just with the talents of their voice, but also with their appearance. And I'll try to show eventually why appearance matters. And I hope I'll convince you by the end why it matters. But let me start actually with, and again, I'm going to go very fast. I'll do almost zero theory, okay? I'll be the opposite of Ronit. Ronit was heavy on theory, so she has a good grounding in sociology. I'm going to be as shallow as the topic, right? So beauty and everything is going to be very shallow because I have to go fast on many studies. But those who want to talk to me about it, I'll be happy to answer later. So my first study into discrimination actually was not an experiment, but it was a field study. Again, not many people do those because they take a lot of time and money and effort. But it's something that most political scientists never do, and I did this with Michael Jones Correa, who's currently at the University of Pennsylvania. And what we were puzzled about is there are many laws in many countries, but very few people tend to actually go and check if the laws are implemented, right? I imagine that in many places it says that you're allowed to drive at 90 kilometers per hour, and many people drive 100, 110. In Germany, whatever, 240. And we want to see how laws are implemented, and specifically laws that were supposed to help minorities to actually vote. In America, to vote, you have to register. And to register, you need to fill forms. And those forms, the law says in America since the 1970s that they should be, if you live in a community in which there's 5% or more a minority, it's supposed to be in the language of that minority, be it Chinese, Czech, it could be Latinos, Japanese, whatever. And we said, okay, let's go about and see if the implementation takes place. And we set about to go. I mean, in America, most of the polling places where you go and register are the DMVs. DMVs are Department of Motor Vehicles, basically where you do your driving license, where you renew your driving license, where you register your car. So they are supposed to, by law, to provide you with forms that are going to be in the language appropriate to you, where you live. And we set out how we're going to do it. We need to go to so many localities in the United States and to see the implementation. So these are all the localities in the United States that are, by law, they are required to provide you with materials. Mostly here what you see is in Spanish, but for instance in San Francisco it's Chinese. In New York it could be other languages. What resources American universities have a lot of, and they are cheap. They're called students. So it's cheap labor. They're kind of human and they're nice and they want to help. And for $50 you can ask them, okay, when you go over spring break home, we ask you to do a certain thing. Go to the DMV at your locality, wherever you live, and please go to the counter and say in Spanish, I need forms to register and vote. And if a person is actually answering to you in Spanish, it means they are complying with the law, because there's supposed to be at least one Spanish-speaking person in that locality. And if they tell you, oh, whatever, Sergio is not here, he'll come here tomorrow, they're not compliant, because it's supposed to be there every day. The second thing we ask them is actually give them the form in Spanish. So bring over back the form in Spanish, or take a photo of that form and give it to us. And we found that in many places there was no compliance. And again, this is something that most studies in political science assume, especially in public policy, they assume, okay, the law is there. And what we found interesting is that in many places it's not there. And why is it important? The reason it's important is because if you look here, and again, I'm going very fast. If you look here, just the non-compliance with having a Spanish-speaking personnel to help you fill the forms, or having the forms in Spanish themselves, has a significant effect on voter turnout. And this effect is big enough that I can tell you with quite confidence that in 2000, if it were implemented, George W. Bush would not have been president, but Al Gore. In 2004, Kerry would have been the president and not Bush. And definitely in 2016, Hillary Clinton would have been president and not that other guy. Okay? So that's why it matters. But this is not, again, this is a field study, it's not the experiments. So let me move now along to talk about experiments. Why experiments are so important and critical and why we like them so much? Well, first of all, because that's the only way to actually get at causality. So many people kind of hint at causality, and many people you see regression analysis, and they hint that that's a causal inference. And just, I was telling Renee this morning, it was crazy because as I was preparing for the talk, there was, last night for us, was published a New York Times article yesterday by a political scientist who said that 2 days ago, a Washington Post article claiming that fake news exposure brings about the election of Donald Trump is not causal. And the New York Times from yesterday, there was another political scientist saying causality is not from a regression and you damn fools should know better. So the nice thing, it's very relevant, it's very polemic, but if you really want to go at the chicken and the egg, you need to go with an experiment. The second reason why I think experiments are really cool is because they imitate reality much better than in a survey. When you're doing a survey or you're doing a household questionnaire, you can hypothesize and tell somebody, what would you do if? But actually I can bring you to a situation that really approximates reality. If you want, I'll show you later what happens to somebody who actually is cyber attacked for real. Okay, that's not the same as asking, if you were to be attacked by a Russian hacker, what would you do? The third reason is that usually it's cheaper. Because with experiments, the N is usually smaller. You need only 100 persons per group, or if you're in psychology, 18, because usually they go like 18, significant, okay? But in political science, usually our N is a bit larger. We tend to accept papers with N's that are a bit larger, but still, it's usually cheaper to do experiments than to do a whole survey. And finally, you could do crazy stuff that you cannot do with regular studies. So you could do really innovative stuff, new stuff with experiments that hopefully I'll show you by the end of this lecture. And there may be other reasons, but at least for me, those are key. I'll start with gender. As you got from yesterday, there's a thing called gender discrimination. And women are discriminated not just in terms of income, household work, and all that kind of stuff. It's also very important in elections. If we were to go about and do just surveys, we can, for instance, ask, and this is a study I did with, Ronit is the leading author on this paper, and we have another co-author who's currently a PhD student, and he asks just item questions. Who is better to deal with crime? Males are perceived as better candidates that can deal with crime. Women are perceived to be better candidates that can deal with issues like education, welfare, and corruption. So, but that's just a survey. How about, how does this help us to understand phenomena like, for instance, survey items tell us that most people today are very tolerant towards female candidates. If we ask today versus the 1940s, and you ask, would you support a female candidate for your party to be president in the United States? More than 95% of people say today, yes, sure, I have no problem. If she's my candidate for my party, I'll vote for her. But in reality, we know that many female candidates, their exit polls show that they're about to win, and results, they lose. Sounds familiar? It happens many times. So what can account to those 5-10% people that are missing there, the difference between almost victory and eventually defeat? So that's what you can do with an experiment. So there's such a thing called a list experiment, and again, this is a very popular method. Currently, as up to this morning, there are 130 list experiments in political science done so far. Okay, I didn't include our one, so 131. So list experiments are basically the following. It's a very simple thing, because when you're doing a survey, you cannot ask people in a survey, let's say a nice young woman calls you and says, do you think women should be getting out of the kitchen and working is equal to men? And she's a nice young lady. You're not going to tell her, no, stay in the kitchen. You're going to be nice and say, yeah, you deserve everything you want. and then after, obviously, at home, you say, hey, go back to your kitchen, right? So, are you a member? Do you like the KKK? No, but some people do, right? So what you can do is do the following. For instance, you would ask, how many of the following statements make you angry or upset? And the respondent only has to tell you the number. How many of those, not exactly which ones. So for instance, gasoline prices are too expensive. Athletes are getting too much money. Using seatbelts annoys me. Corporations are polluting the environment. Now, one group gets 4 questions. The second group, which again statistically is identical, it's random, a woman serving as my mayor, or a woman serving as president, or a woman serving as my prime minister. Now, if there are no discrimination whatsoever and everybody completely is okay with this statement, the numbers across the 2 groups should be, the number of statements that annoy me should be the same. So on average, let's say 2 statements annoy me on this list, and because everyone is very liberal, this should have 0 effect. So I'll have an average of 2 for one group, an average of 2 for the other. But in reality, what we found is that we have a difference. So if everybody in this group was as liberal and everybody had no problem with female mayors, we should have the same height here. But we see that we have a certain number of people that the average goes up. So the average goes up. It shows you that some people are uncomfortable with the new statement. Okay? It doesn't tell you specifically who they are, but we can compare the 2 groups based on demographic and see, okay, I see here certain demographics here, and make some estimations. So this is one way to get about uncommon things, unpleasant things like discrimination. Okay. Another type of discrimination comes is against people who are stressed. We think usually about discrimination as something that would perhaps happen to, let's say, for many years, the handicapped were discriminated. For instance, access to the ballot in voting. There were no ramps for handicapped, right? If you were blind, that was tough. You cannot vote, okay? If you're deaf, sometimes they would make problems for you or in whatever. But not many people, and by the way, and governments all across the world have facilitated, because they think that voting is important, they have facilitated access to the ballot by, for instance, having ramps for the handicapped or making special arrangements. I hear that your system is quite nice in that sense that if somebody is sick or old or handicapped, the ballot people can come to them, which is quite one of the most liberal systems in the world. It may be a feel uncomfortable that you have to have them come to your home, but in Israel I imagine that if we had that, 95% of people would say, I'm handicapped. Can you come? There's a Barcelona game this morning, I'm a handicapped. And they would use that as an excuse. So what about other people that perhaps are unable to come to voting? And this research started off a couple of years ago with an idea I had in which my sister was all giddy about going shopping. And we were having lunch and she said, hey, why don't we skip lunch, skip a dessert and go shopping? And for me, skipping dessert is like sacrilegious. But she said, I prefer go and I said to my brother-in-law, who is the second author here, who's a neurologist, I told Gal, look, can I measure something in her blood that will show me what's happening in her bloodstream? Because I think what she feels for shoes, I feel for voting. There must be something happening to voters when they vote, because, you know, it may happen to, perhaps just because I'm a political scientist, but are there any political scientists here? A few. Yes. Okay. So after I vote, don't you feel like you just gave blood? You feel like you did something good? I'm like, I feel good with myself. So the same thing happens here. So is it something in us that makes us feel so? My brother-in-law, who knew nothing about voting, but he's a neurologist, so he told me, look, there's nothing like it, but we can test cortisol. And I said, cortisol, what's that? And he said, cortisol measures your stressful situation, how stressed you are in a certain moment. The body secretes cortisol when you're in a situation of fight or flight, meaning, let's say you're walking down the street and you see a lion. So your cortisol would bump really high to help you run faster, your energy levels are higher, your endurance for pain is higher, but you're really stressed. It should work also with your mothers-in-law. So when you meet them in surprise, you get the same effect. So what we did is we actually wanted to test it. As you can imagine, voting in Israel is quite an intense experience, and people are stressed about it. But obviously, it's not just in Israel. In many other countries, you have people that are stressed. This is from your national elections, your last national elections. This is a supporter of the president hitting a reporter. But also, people are stressed in general about elections. We don't exactly know why they are stressed, but perhaps it's the long line. You have to stand many times in a long line. They're going to ask me for my ID, and perhaps I forgot my ID or my passport. There's going to be people I hate. It's going to be crowded. And what we did is we actually went along and we asked people to do something, which is quite interesting. Instead of relying on self-report measures, of asking them, are you stressed? We feel, and research shows that those measures are a bit problematic because people are overconfident, or people in general, they have a tendency to respond in a certain way. So if some nice young researcher comes to you and says, are you stressed? No, not at all. I'm dandy, I feel good. Where you're actually not, but you don't want to admit it. The nice thing about cortisol is that cortisol never lies. You cannot control it. It's your body response to whatever emotional state you're at. So it's like, in a sense, blood pressure. So it reflects something upon you that perhaps you don't want to admit. So the way to go about it is that you have to fill a vial with saliva. It's a bit unpleasant to do, especially if you're standing next to the voting station. We got permission from the Central Voting Commission to run our study really close to the voting station because we wanted people to fill it up as they were about to vote. It's a bit disgusting and problematic. I won't go into the details, but it's nice to have good research assistants. And we did that. And surprisingly, what we found, and this is what you can see, again, it's very, just to give you a sense, people were giving us cortisol the election day, and we asked them a few days later to give us cortisol again when they were resting. And this is a sabbatical in Israel. So it's sabbatical here, Friday morning, where people don't work, the same hour, because cortisol is very sensitive to the hour of the day, and we found a significant effect between the two groups. Again, this was a preliminary study that we did, and just to give you a sense how problematic are self-reported measures, it was done in the study. This study was done in the town where my sister lives. So when I looked at my sister's, because I can look at my sister's data, and I looked at the numbers, and my sister said she was like, "I'm completely cool. I'm not stressed at all. This is like a fun day for me." And her cortisol level, hers, was 40. Okay? An average person wakes up with the top is when you wake up, it's around 12, and it goes down as you progress throughout the day. So my sister at that time was 40. So she was my third outlier. And she said, no, I'm not stressed at all. So that gives you a sense. Okay, so from this, I got the idea that are people perhaps avoiding politics because they are stressed? Because, some people, you ask them, did you vote? No, I don't want to hassle. There are too many people there. If politics is not for me. Perhaps they're not doing it because we tend to think of those people as kind of lazy. Why don't you go and vote? You get a sabbatical. It's easy. It's next to your home. You only have to walk a mile or a kilometer, and you can vote and do your civic duty. And some people don't do it. Is it perhaps not because they're lazy? It's perhaps because they're too stressed about going to vote. So in Israel, I couldn't do anything about it empirically, but I had this idea that perhaps I can do it in another setting. And the other setting is the United States. So I gathered forces with some of my colleagues and now friends at the University of Nebraska. That's where Alice is going to be hopefully soon. And the nice thing about the United States, it has something that Israel doesn't and allows me to do an experiment. And that is that in America, in most states, you can vote by mail. So, if we are right, and part of the reason why people don't vote is because they're stressed about the actual going and voting, either because they're stressed about their civic duty, or they're stressed about just the performance of it. You have to be in a public place. We can reduce that stress by allowing certain people to vote at home. By the way, in America, for instance, there are already 2 states in America where you can only vote by mail. So let's say you live in Seattle and you actually want to go and vote, you have to mail it. There's no place to go and vote. So you could do it at the last day if you had a reason you were abroad or something and you want to do it. But if you're not abroad, you don't have no excuse, you'll do it only by mail. So what we did is we ran this study in which we had 3 groups of people. We had their cortisol levels from beforehand, with their basic cortisol levels, because some people are higher than others. And we split them randomly into 3 groups. One group was asked to actually go and vote. And after they voted, chewing the saliva, giving us a sample. A second group was asked to vote early in the morning, as they wake up. And then in the afternoon, at the time we took the saliva from the first sample, to actually go to a mall that they don't know, a new place, and do some shopping, interact with other people, and give us saliva. So to see if the public of not knowing persons being outside is stressful. And a third group of people was asked to actually vote at home with an envelope, and as they were filling the envelope, to give us their saliva. And the idea was if we could try to differentiate where does this stress come from. Is it something about your civic duty? If it's your civic duty, you should be stressed also when you're doing the envelope, because you're deciding it's going to be Hillary or Trump. And if I elect Trump, it's going to be hell. If I elect Hillary, it's going to be worse. I have to decide, I don't know what. Or if it's the public element of it, so you should be stressed about going to a new store, buying a few things, and seeing people that you don't know. And what we found after we did this design is that actually the only group that's the cortisol levels go up is for the people that voted at the ballot. So the other groups are basically 0, and it should be a bit lower cortisol because it's diurnal. So during the day it should go every day, every minute should go lower. So so what we found is that actually going to the place, having to vote in a certain place is stressful. And why is it important? It's important because there are enough people that feel stressed about voting, at least in our sample, to convince us that what we saw earlier, this should be expanded to all states, allowing everyone who wants to vote by mail to do so. And perhaps that way we'll get back a few voters who currently are not voting. So much like we helped the handicapped in the past, hopefully we will help people who feel stressed about the voting situation and actually they go and vote. Perhaps that will get this person, right, Zemek? That's your president? So remember what happened when he went to vote? There was this lady who flashed herself. Perhaps next election he will be stressed. He doesn't want to vote, so he can vote at home. That would be great. And yeah, I don't know how many supporters of Zemek are here, but by the funny things, I think not many. But okay. All right. Now, I'll go now to what my original interest was when I started studying discrimination. It was about studying physical attractiveness. And by the way, there's a huge correlation between those who study physical attractiveness and the attractiveness of the scholars, but it's reverse. So I know most of us, and we're not a pretty bunch in general. but we got interested in this topic for some reason. Now, we know that politicians spend tons of time and money and effort to look better. Is it just because they are vain, or is it because they know something? And perhaps what they know, and by the way, just to give you an overview, so this is Joe Biden, former Vice President of the United States. This was in the 80s, and this is how he looks now. This is the guy who just last week told Donald Trump that he can beat the shit out of him, okay? Hillary Clinton, when she was a senator, when she was a candidate. So you notice that age does wonders, okay? This is Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, and you can see that before he had this mole here, and before he ran the last campaign for Israeli Prime Ministership, he said the doctor told him he has to remove it for medical reasons. Just 2 weeks before the election, right? Hollande, the former president of France, this is before he ran the campaign, and his wife told him, if you want to win, you have to lose 20 kilos, and that's what he did. And this is the new Hollande, and he did win. This is Berlusconi, obviously. You can see this is the before, this is the after. I'm not sure he does it to win votes or the girls. With Berlusconi, you never know, but you see that his hair is wonder. I should get the same doctor, I guess. And this is Cristina de Kirchner, so the former president of Argentina. We have, for known fact, know that she went at least 27 medical procedures to look like she is today. It's almost unrecognizable that it's the same woman. But she keeps getting better and better. Maybe by the age of 120, she's going to be a supermodel. Now, I'm going back. Okay, sorry. Another thing we know, and it started by the work by Postum, is one of the best writers on media and politics, and was followed up by a study I did with a friend of mine. We found that, at least in America, better looking politicians, mainly congressmen and senators in America, their appearance is the third largest contributor to their media coverage. More than, for instance, work in parliament. So the only thing that's better than that is their seniority, and if the state that they come is a big state, like Texas or California. The third most important variable was if they are pretty or not, okay? So it seems there's something there. And there are many different studies who have looked into it. Why do we people prefer, again, for racism and gender, I think it goes without saying, I don't need to explain anything because I know that you know kind of the literature and the theory. But why should we prefer people who are better looking? Okay, and we're not talking again for necessarily for mating, we're talking about voting or work. One reason is evolutionary. It seems that people who are more beautiful, and again, beauty is kind of universal. So it's facial symmetry, it's the tone of the skin, and there seems to be quite an agreement cross-culturally about who is beautiful and who is not. And also, in many cases, like for instance, having lighter skin. The benefit of having lighter skin is you can see if somebody has a rash, if he has a fever. On somebody who has darker skin, evolutionary, you can't get any information from the color of their skin. Another reason that's not least important is socialization. Because socialization plays a big part and becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in which people who are beautiful are reinforced by society. Because, for instance, we have a daughter, and I never heard any parent who has the daughter says, usually you hear this sentence like, "Oh, why don't you bring that nice, lovely girl to play with you?" I never heard some parents saying, "Why don't you bring that really ugly, nice girl to play with you?" Right? Okay? And when you have a kid, right, they always tell you, "Oh, she's so beautiful." I never heard somebody say, "Oh, she's so ugly," right? We kind of reinforce those stereotypes every Disney movie, right? Except for Shrek, which is kind of like a reverse story. In all the stories, like the princess has to be beautiful, good is beautiful, beautiful is good. In political science, there are early studies on beauty and politics started in the 1980s, Rosenberg and others. Usually the design was very simple, experiment. You show two images of candidates. One is obviously better looking than the other, and you ask people, who would you vote for? And quite simply, yes, the more beautiful guy won. Okay. Other designs, Todorov is the leading expert on this, do other ways to go about it, in which they basically take real politicians. This is Senator Feingold, I don't remember the guy here, and they basically give you images to people who are neophytes. They know nothing about these individuals, they don't know they are senators, and they tell them, if you had to guess who of the two would won the election, and in 60% of 100 they get it right. Okay, so it's above chance. The more beautiful person actually wins more elections. So it gives you an indication that there's something there. However, when you evaluate things like this, you have to remember that elections are much richer environments. You get party positions, you get their ideology, and you get their traits from when you're looking at the candidate like your president or any other politician. You have much more information than their looks. Their looks is only one heuristic out of many. Moreover, when you're looking at politicians, one could be really good looking, like Brad Pitt looking. But he stands like this and speaks like this and he has no charisma, right? So there goes Brad Pitt. Beauty is not enough. So you have to control also for language, energy, and charisma. Now, the reason I dislike these studies, although I think they are a great contribution, is that they lack realism. But I'll get to realism in a second. One study I did in which images are used is actually exactly like those studies, because in primary elections in Israel, in some parties, and also in many other countries, especially in Africa, it's very common to have the photos of candidates at the ballot. For instance, in Africa, many countries have low levels of literacy, and therefore they use the party symbols and the party candidates in photos. That way you can decide if you want to support that person or not. And then becomes the case, if I put a nicer photo of myself or my party or my candidate, will it win more votes? And in many cases, you choose your own image. So you can bring your own image, photoshopped, you look 10 years younger, right? I can make myself look better. Would it have an effect on voters? And that's what we wanted to study in this study. So what we did with Azilev from Ariel University is we looked at candidates and we manipulated the images, in which, as you can see here, this looks a bit nicer, this looks a bit less nice. But again, we wanted to make it realistic. We want to make this guy to look like Brad Pitt in his good option. This is the natural, okay? So we cannot make him look like Brad Pitt because it would be unrealistic and nobody would use an image of Brad Pitt instead of himself. And also we don't want to make it too ugly, because even if let's say the opposite candidate's friend is operating the ballot, you won't make him so ugly that nobody would recognize him. So we made sure that these differences are not significant to the eye. Okay, they are really minuscule, but they're still there. The same goes here. This is our former foreign minister. And again, we did very subtle changes in the images, and we want to test it for real. And now we tested it for real, and the reason, again, this is close to reality, as I said, in the Likud primaries, and this is the guy voting in our system. Okay, so this is our Minister of Foreign Affairs voting for himself in the system. They vote like this. So in the Likud primaries, which is our head government party, they get the images, and they used to be also on the screen, and you select from the images. So the image carries a lot of weight. And we did that with our system. We got permission from the Likud to place our ballot before their ballots. So we don't get any ballots effect from them, they get ballots effect from us. So that's good for an experiment, you don't want to contaminate. So they had to first vote for us, and then they actually went to their real ballot. And we did it across the nation in 4 ballot stations. And what we found is that the good news is that for known politicians, it had 0 effect. So if you know the politician, it doesn't matter if I made him look better or worse. This guy got exactly the same number of votes regardless of the image we put. And again, some people got to see him beautiful, some people got to see him ugly. It had zero effect whatsoever. However, for lower key elections, people where they don't have much information, I imagine you have it here. If I show you the image, obviously, of your president, most people recognize him and know who he is. But if I'll tell you, okay, we're voting for the city comptroller, okay, or a municipality, I don't know, supervisor. Most people don't know the individuals, they don't know the images, and that's where it's tricky, because there the images do carry. As you can see, these are the low information elections. People don't know the candidates, and when they don't know the candidates, for 3 out of the 4 cases, when the neutral or the beautified version of that candidate does much better than the ugly version of the candidate. So I can really sway elections. So this is the percentage of people who voted for that person. So I can really boost almost 20% boost of support. Okay? So this is very significant. It's actually more than 20% because it's almost 50% versus this option. So this is troubling. This is troubling because there's no reason why we should prefer somebody who is less qualified but just looks good. But that's reality. Okay? That's real life. So this is where we rely just on images, but it had a reason why we just use images. This is how people vote in many, many countries. But let's go to another study, which this is something I didn't publish yet, which I'm working on because I want to get better data or more extensive data. And I want to be closer to reality. Many, many experiments are very crude and not real to reality, and I'm very against those type of experiments. I kind of dislike them because I think that we should approximate as much as possible reality as we can. And therefore, in these studies, what I try to do is to try and understand can heuristics such as beauty affect voting when other information is available. The party positions, the charisma of the candidate, his body language, his tone, all that information is available just like in regular elections. And how the makeup, the general makeup of the candidate, which is again not just his beauty, it's his body language, is even the setting where he's shooting his ads is significant. So let me give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So these are ads that I produced in America with professional actors that are supposed to imitate the ladies are doing a race for Congress, and the male you're going to see here is running for mayor. Okay?
Voting, much like serving your community, is about getting out there every day, rain or shine, and facing the challenge. It is a commitment to do your very best. For the last 16 years, I've been serving this community. First on city council, and later in our state legislature, fighting for you. I'm running for Congress because voting, much like serving your community, is about getting out there every day, and facing the challenge. It is a commitment to do your very best. For the last 16 years, I've been...
So again, it's a professional actor. We tested also the audio to make sure that people without any aids of visual are giving the same score with the audio, so the audio is exactly the same intonation. The same goes here. We have Dan Lopez. And we have Dan Lopez. Okay? This is actually a friend who's an actor. He has a PhD in theater, and I asked him for a month to grow a beard, and then I asked him to shave it for the commercial. Okay, so it's a real beard. So, are people shallow as we think? So as you can see, in America, if you're conservative and look like Barbara Bush, you get more votes. This is American voters. She got 13% more votes than the other lady. The beard, for those of you who have beard, not many, but it will cost you. Unless you're running for the head of the Hamas, that's helpful. In Latin America, a mustache can be helpful. Also in Texas, it's a masculine thing. But in America, for most part, it's something that will cost you 70% of the electorate. Okay? Here's another example. I'm not going to show you the video, but you can see here it's the same guy, once with just things behind him in a computer, and once without the setting. Because you see always the president, when you run for office, it's very common that you have a candidate, kind of like style of Kennedy. He sits like this, and you see an image of his family. By the way, it's reversed, right? Because he's never sitting here. He's sitting there, but his family is facing the camera, right? So it's the family and books, kind of like mahogany tables, very respectful, volumes of things that he never read, but it looks kind of nice. And that thing cost him 14%. Okay? And again, everything stands equal. It's the same candidate, the same platform, the same body language. You can see the body language was even practiced. We did it for hours to make sure that he does the exact same things in his 30-second ad. Now, the nice thing about it is that obviously in races you also run against the other guy. And you have to compare the two groups, not just what happens to your evaluation, how much you like your own candidate, it affects the evaluation of the person you're running against. So for instance, in this race, this guy seems less leader, less attractive, and less as somebody who can do the job. But it also affected the doctor who's running against him. When she was competing against this guy, she was evaluated as more attractive than when she was running against this guy. Okay? Here is another example. Here we have a guy with a beard, kind of like a goatee beard. And again, this is an actor. I paid him to grow a beard, and then he shaved it in Israel. And he looks like if you're old enough, it's kind of like the evil person in what's it called? Professor Zorkov or whatever. And he looks like an evil person from somewhere. And as you can see, there were no differences in the evaluations among the two groups. But the guy who was running against this guy, right? And it's the same guy running with him, the same guy running against him. But when this pair was compared, people were thinking that this guy is nicer. Because compared to somebody with a goatee that looks kind of like an evil professor, so this guy looks really nice. Okay, so these are the kind of things that I want to get at, because if the effect is here, when you have intonation, when you have body language, when you have all that kind of information, party positions, so they're standing for something, they're saying what they're voting for or against, then it shows that it's in reality it works. It's not just in a lab setting. Okay, finally, the last study that I've been studying in the last couple of months, and it's thanks to when Alesh came to see me in Israel, we started thinking of something to do together. Something that's been intriguing me for a while, and also Alesh told me that it's an issue here, was ethnic discrimination. And this is also with Asaf Lebanon, who's currently at Stanford, but he's going back to Haifa. What we wanted to know is to what extent are people discriminated based on their ethnicity. And you have, for instance, here you have Roma, and you have, let's say, original Czechs, or I don't know how to call them. I'm not that familiar with the terminology, but let's call them, for instance, for now, non-Roma Czechs, okay? And Roma Czechs. And in Israel, we have people that came, Jews that came from Arab countries. We call them Mizrahi or Sephardic Jews. And we have Jews that came from European countries, and we call them Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews, much like the Europeans, they tend to be lighter in their color of their skin. Now, most studies that we see out there in political science are studies in which you get, either you manipulate the name, so it's very popular to do both in sociology, in economics, and also some degree in political science. You play with the name and you see, okay, will Latifa get more calls when she applies than Jenny? So obviously Latifa, Jamal will get less interviews when they apply for a job than Michael or John or Nick. All right? So that's very common. I have another paper, I want to talk about it, in which I asked Israeli Jews and Palestinians to rate Obama, and they saw a clip of Obama talking, and a group of them saw Obama, and it says below Barack Obama, CNN, and a group saw, and it's a 4-minute video, and for 20 seconds you see the name and then it goes away, Another group saw the same video, but it was Barack Hussein Obama. Okay, and those people, by the way, nobody thought that they saw Hussein. I did a post-mortem, I tried to ask, so what's the name of the candidate? Nobody said it was Hussein. It doesn't register. But on a 7-point Likert scale, his evaluation of the people who saw Barack Hussein Obama think is much more pro-Palestinian, both among Palestinians and among Israelis. Okay, so names matter. Okay, what's in that name? As Shakespeare said, so names matter. So on one side we have people who do this kind of work. On another side we have people who do manipulations, much like I did before, in which you change the color of the skin. And the darker you get, the less chances you get of getting the job, of being hired, of being promoted, of getting more money, and so forth. And we thought together, Alice and I, that we should do something that combines the two and do a 2x2 in which we play both the names and the looks of the candidates. And what we did is we generated these individuals. It looks kind of cool right now, but it took us a year to get where we are, because this is the final and third pilot, because it was really hard to find a Roma person that would look as Sephardic Jew, and finding a Czech person who looks Ashkenazi Jew, especially for the males, it was really hard, and it took us almost a year of trying. But these work, and both we already tested it in Israel, and we found that, and also in the Czech Republic, that this guy who is actually Romanian, it has nothing to do with Israel, so he's a Romanian, actually Roma person. So in Israel, people think that he's a Jew from an Arab country, and this guy looks kind of like European. And the same for the ladies, the change of the color and tone do affect. But again, it's important to note that it's the same person, okay? It's exactly the same person, just you clear the skin and you clear the eyes and you get... So, moving along with that, and again, we just finished I got the data on Wednesday night, okay? So that's another lesson, I think, about political science. We work by deadlines, and we barely make them. So what we wanted to do is we manipulated it, and we want to do the exact same study in the Czech Republic for two kind of jobs. One is to be a manager. Would you hire this person to be a manager? So the managers, you got 2 vidas if you're a respondent. Some people got a vida in which this guy, some people got the vida with this guy. And also in this version, you can get a name that's Sephardic or an Ashkenazi. Here you can get also a name that's Sephardic or Ashkenazi, or think of Czech typical name or Roma typical name, and the same would go here. And the same for female, and you get a vida, and you have to decide, would you hire this person? Do you think other people would hire this person? How much salary would you give this person? Do you think he's nice, attractive? So I just barely was able to look at the data before I came, and I'll just give you an overview without controls or anything. So when both of them have a Ashkenazi name, Goldstein is a very common Ashkenazi name. When we asked, will you yourself hire this person, this manager, or will you be hired by other people? This version got significantly less answers in the positive manner. When we played with the name, Goldstein and Zulai, but again, what affects here is the looks, right? So Goldstein versus Zulai, which is a Sephardic name. So this guy is less likely to be hired. Moving to politician. Would you hire this politician? Again, now they didn't get the vita, they got an article from a newspaper, local newspaper, saying how wonderful this politician is, how much he did for the community, it's a local mayor race, would you vote for this person? And again, in those versions in which both of them have a Sephardic name, so the equivalent would be a Roma name, this is less likely to be elected by the public who answered our survey. And our survey is 1,600 people. So there's 100 per condition, because we have 16 conditions. And for the females, only one condition currently works without controls, and that's this is going to be less selected because she's darker, not because of the name or anything else. So that's where we want to take this study and continue with the study, and see to what extent is it significant, to what extent it is still an issue. I understand that here it may be more an issue than Israel. In Israel, for instance, just to give you a sense of it, so my brother-in-law, the neurologist, is half Moroccan, half Polish, okay? And my nephew is a quarter Moroccan and 3/4 Polish, so it's kind of like a mixture of everything. My other brother-in-law is Azulay, which is a Moroccan name, so I have Moroccans on both sides of my family. It's less of an issue. Those Jews came to Israel almost 60 years ago, some 70 years ago. So there is some kind of discrimination there in certain practices. There is a culture war in which they want more Oriental music to be sound, pop Oriental, versus the more mainstream Israeli rock, which tends to be wider. But we want to see to what extent it's pretty prevalent and important, and we want to compare it with the Czech Republic using the exact, and that's the nice thing about it, using the exact same images, using the exact same stories and scripts, the same vitas everywhere. So we have a really cross-national design that I think would be really interesting if we can get it done eventually. All right. I'll stop here. If you want me to continue into cyber attacks or something, I'll be happy to, or field studies, but it's really up to the crowd, because I know it's an hour and an hour has passed. So, thank you. So what's the verdict? As a political scientist, I'm pro-democracy. I kind of think it's cool, but if there's a dictatorship here, I'll comply with that too. Shall I continue? 5-10 minutes more. Questions first, whatever you prefer. Yeah.
I have a question concerning the last study. Do you have also the Czech data?
No. We didn't run the Czech data yet. I would love to have the Czech data. If that were the case, I would present to you already the Czech data, but I don't. And even the Israeli data is kind of troubling, because here's some small example how important the data collection is. In an experiment, everything has to be identical. And I had the data 2 weeks ago, and which means I had plenty of time to actually do the analysis. But then I noticed that the person who programmed the survey, he thought that I gave respondents 30 seconds to read the bio, the Vida, or read the newspaper article. And he decided that the Vida is shorter, so people should only spend 20 seconds on it. So I have 20 seconds on the Vida, 30 seconds on the newspaper article. That's a difference. That's already not the same experiment. So that's why they had to rerun the data. Okay, so they gave me a whole new survey for free because they fucked up. Sorry, but the language. So I wish I had. But hopefully by the end of the year we'll have also Roma data. Czech data about Roma and non-Roma. Shall I continue? Shall I take more questions? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, perhaps one question
Sure.
to the last concerning the difficulty with the potential causal effect, because one causal factor is also that now when the images are the same, but there is some amount of manipulation, and in there is also the possibility that it is the manipulation, and in some cases it seems that the image is like less realistic or something like that, and then
that is a concern, and that's why we lost the last Roma person we had. We lost him because we asked if he looks realistic, and people saying he looks artificial. In the Israeli case, we had to make him to look Oriental, and it didn't go well. Here, he might have passed as a Roma person. In Israel, people thought it was terrible. The first guy we killed him because the data killed him, right? So we killed him because in Israel it worked great, but here people said he's not Roma, he's Middle Eastern.
But the difficulty is that if there is a kind of a subliminal processing, so that people cannot tell whether...
Well, we passed to a different group of people. We asked them to what extent this person looks Czech or Roma or something else. And if people tell us he looks Czech, he looks Czech. It's a different group of people. So we do it with a different sample. I did it among my students. I got like 100 students telling me, gave me a rate from 0 to 10, to what extent do you think this person is Ashkenazi or Sephardic. So we have a good feeling about that. But again, this is our third try, so 3 times makes perfect, because 3 times and a few $100 makes perfect. But that's the thing with experiments. You really want to have your instrument. It's like the same with intonation. Many people do body language, and it's not exactly the same. If the body language of one candidate is slightly off from the other, that could be the effect. Or if the intonation, one is more convincing than the other. So you have to have everything really under control. Yeah, sir.
In the study of discrimination, you add to quite usual gender, ethnicity, sex, also attractiveness, stress. And what about education?
In what sense would you study?
Are people discriminated according to education?
Sure, for sure. For sure, I can tell you in America, if you, not just even at education level, even where you got your education. So when I say I studied at Cornell, people say, ooh, ah. But if you say I studied at Ohio State, which in American politics actually is better than Cornell, which is the other second option we were thinking of going when we did our PhDs, people were saying, oh, Ohio State is nice, which in American is, it sucks, because they're very polite. So the name of the place even, not just even the level of education. And actually you could be discriminated for being too smart. So there could be the case that you have a PhD and you say, oh, you're too much of a brainiac, we don't want to hire you. You have too much information, especially for women. Who wants a woman who's so opinionated, knows so much? Again, going back, she has to go back to the kitchen like before, right? So discrimination, you could discriminate on anything. Right? In America, people discriminate on the sports team you support. So you can go to a job interview and somebody says, how about those Knicks, or about those Nets, or about the Giants? And you say, the Giants suck. Out. For them, it's like almost religion. So any society discriminates on anything, okay? And for instance, in the Israeli society, the Bedouin community, which is mostly Muslim, a small community in Israel. The Bedouins that live next door to us, we live right close to a village, a Bedouin village, they would never let their daughters marry Bedouins from the south. Because Bedouins from the south come from Africa. Bedouins from the north come from Syria and Iraq. So they're like sophisticated. So they would never let their, well, the Bedouins in the south would say, yes, I'm marrying into Bedouins of the north. It's an upscale. It's like for an African American to marry a WASP in a white American. So, yeah, we all discriminate. Yes, sir.
Will you be comparing the Israeli data with the Czech data, and if so, what are you hoping to find out by that comparison? Because for me, I'm no expert on Israel, but the difference between the numbers of Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews is much more closer to like 50-50 than it is with Czech people and Roma, where it's like 3% of the population tops. So.
Right. Well, for the Roma people, I hear that the difference, that there's variance in numbers. Some people estimate it's 5%, some people say it's a bit higher, some people say it's lower. But true, the numbers are different. So let me tell you 2 things I hope. First of all, as a human being, I hope to find 0 difference. As a human being. As a researcher who wants to get published, I hope to find big differences so I can get published, because nobody wants to publish a paper that says there's no discrimination at all. Right? That's a paper that nobody gets published. But I suspect because in Israel also our minority has been almost integrated. Like our Minister of Culture these days is Sephardic Jew, and she's pushing the Sephardic ticket along the way. We have many members of the parliament who are Sephardic, many ministers who are Sephardic. You don't have even one member of parliament who is Roma. So obviously the effects should be larger among your society, but I want to see also to what extent, and also to see if we can remedy it to some degree. For instance, you can pass, let's say we find that names are discriminatory. In some places already in the world, there are laws that prohibit you from reviewing visas for any job application based on names. You get a number. You get a serial number, and the visa is evaluated by a serial number. And then if you like the candidate, you find the number. So you can perhaps do a remedy to discrimination by doing that. Okay? For instance, I'll give you just one nice example actually that Ronit told me about, which is really cool. The New York Philharmonic Orchestra. For years, they had 20% female music players, and that's it, in the Philharmonic. And they never could change it. It was always about 20. And around 6 years ago, they decided to do something. They did kind of like a The Voice thing. You have The Voice, the program, in which the judges are not able to see the thing. Oh, I should probably... What should I do? Press. Which one?
Right.
The right one. It's always the right. I'm a lefty, so I'm against everything that's on the right. So they forced the judges of the Philharmonic to see there was a curtain, and they did all the auditions with the curtain. And after the auditions, surprise, the number jumped to 40% in one audition. Okay, so we could do some. I cannot make somebody who looks Roma not to look Roma, but I can make sure that it's illegal for you to do Google on my face when you evaluate my candidacy for a job, so you can see, he's Roma. I don't want him. Okay, so that's the remedy. As a social scientist, I'm a progressive. I want to use social science to benefit society. So I think it matters. So. There's a guy out there right now, 16, who was born Roma. It's not his fault. He wants to advance in life, and he was born Roma. What can he do? So you could do something about it. And actually, those things work. Those things work, and they work perfectly. So I hope that answers.
Thank you.
Shall I go? Okay. So all right. So I don't know. This is. I don't know how much time we have. Okay, well, I'll try to do this fast and go to cyber things, which I think is more sexy. Here's a study that I did with, this is Yosef Sored is my PhD student. He's already a doctor, and a few colleagues, Daphne Canetti from Haifa University, David Nickerson is from Temple University in the United States. And what we tried to do is, I don't know to what extent you're known with literature. There's a huge literature that started in political science in the 1990s. And so far there are probably like 200 or 250 studies in which people try to get people to vote. Get out the vote. That's GOTV. Get out the vote. So basically you take a town. That's the original design in New Haven. That's where Yale is. And Gerber and Green were scholars at Yale. And they called half the population and told them, it's important to go and vote. Go and vote. And half the population randomly get no message. And then you compare the two. And you see, okay, did we get more turnout after the election by the people who were reminded that it's important to vote? And there are gazillion studies, as I said, like that, in which they do that. Sometimes it's partisan, so a Democrat candidate will call you and say, it's important, if you're a Democrat, you should vote Democrat this election. And sometimes it's very civil-minded, kind of like, elections are important and we should want you to vote, regardless of what you want to vote, go and vote. And those studies have been done by phone, mail, text, hangers that you put on the doorknob. You can put a flyer. And the results are usually very modest. Some would say minuscule. At most, they are like 2-3% effect. Okay, it's important because in America, the elections are between two candidates, so 51-49 becomes 49-51 with this effect. But in generally, let's say in the Czech Republic or in Israel, this study would be less significant because you say, okay, so the leading party will have, instead of having 55% of the vote, they're going to get 53% of the vote. They're still going to get the vote. So we were thinking that perhaps the reason that the effect is so small is because the effect is, the phone call or the flyer or the text is not that important to some people, but it's important to other people. And what we did is basically, this is a design, I won't go into details, but basically in each street, we randomly gave, let's say, even houses got treated and they are getting the phone call or the mail or the flyer, and the odd houses, meaning the even or uneven houses, get zero, get nothing. So that way you control for socioeconomic status of the street. So some streets are more affluent, some streets are less affluent, some streets have a lot of kids, some streets have less kids. So the assumption is that In no street you can say that house number 54 are the rich people and the 55s are the poor people. Okay? It doesn't happen that way. And what we found is that actually the effect is not, when we average all our sample, the effect is like 2%. But when we take into account how much of an effort you have to make to actually go and vote, meaning the distance you have to go and vote, then if you're living between, let's say, 500 meters to the ballot to, let's say, 1200 meters, then the effect is significant and important. It can get up to 10% higher. Okay? So people who have to actually make an effort, it's too short to take the car, but it's too long to actually walk it unconsciously, that you say, oh, I'm going to go and vote. And if you have to actually make an effort and walk a few blocks to vote, then the reminder is helpful. The reminder that you should go and vote is helpful, and you can see the effect, the size of the effect here. It can be up to almost 15% for people who live around 600 meters from the ballot, and deteriorates when you already take the car. So this is one type of experiment, large-scale experiment. It's not easy to do, but it's a nice thing to do. Alice and I were contemplating on doing something. We are gathering data. Did we finish gathering the data of the up and down? Not yet, not yet. So we're going to have a study in which we actually, some places in the last election, people voted on the ground floor. Some people voted on the first floor, second floor. So supposedly people who are voting on the second floor have a cost of voting that's higher. And I'm going to say, oh, should I go to the second floor and vote? No, it's too much of an effort. I'm going to go home. Okay? So we're going to do that vertically. This was horizontally, and we're going to try to do it vertically. I guess the people who vote in heaven are different. But now let me take you to a different study. And this has to do with cyber attacks. All the studies on cyber attacks, and I'll try to be modest, but really, all studies until this study on cyber attacks are only studies in which people are from economists that say, okay, how much would it cost if we have a cyber attack and we don't have electricity for a day? Or people from disaster studies in which they say, okay, what happens if the lights of traffic go off? How many people would die? Or people from water control that say, okay, if the water is contaminated, how many people will die? So those are the kind of studies that we have so far. And we, as political scientists, we're more interested in the individual, the community at large, but individuals. Meaning, what is the effect of a cyber attack to you as an individual? Does it affect you when you're attacked as an individual? Because cyber attacks can happen nationally, but cyber attacks can happen to you. How many of you had the experience that, for instance, your computer crashed and you couldn't get it to start? How stressed were you when you thought, oh shit, I lost all the data that I collected last year? Right? It happened to you? I just lost my computer a few weeks ago, so I was like, my hard drive went down the drain. I lost very few things because I had a cloud. But if you think you didn't have a cloud, you would be, right, hysterical. So what would happen if that were to happen to you, and wanted to study what would be the effect of such an attack on the individual? Because individuals later on, for instance, may come with pitchforks to the city town saying, I demand blood. Somebody ruined all my photos. I want blood. You should bomb Syria for the cyber attack. You should bomb Russia. You should do something about it. So what we did is we tried to imitate life as much as we could. We're not allowed to mess with people's computers. I wish we could. That would be so nice to go to get, and we could do it technologically. We were working with a company that specializes in hacking. So in like 30 seconds, he was inside my computer. I didn't grant him any permission. It took him 30 seconds to be inside my computer. Okay? So that's how easy it is. Obviously, nobody gave me permission at the university to do so. The closest thing we got is we were allowed to bring students to a lab to sit next to a computer and attack that computer. That we got permission for. And so we brought students to the lab and we lied to them, which is very common in experiments. We told them, look, we're going to do a study about the love hormone, oxytocin, right? Oxytocin, they call it sometimes the love hormone. When you hug people say that oxytocin goes up and you feel oxytocin, and you feel better by hugging. And we said, oh, this is so cool stuff. We're gonna go to Facebook and we're gonna ask you to send a message of thank you notes to people around the world on Facebook for supporting Israel. And we want to measure your oxytocin before and after and see if this message of love affects you in a nice way. And thank you so much for doing this. Because there are, people that are supporting Israel all across the world, and we thought it's going to be a nice disguise for the study. Well, we're not actually measuring their oxytocin, we're actually measuring their cortisol without them knowing about it. So what we did is we brought them over and they started answering a questionnaire and they logged on to Facebook and they sent to this guy in Malaysia or something, thank you for supporting Israel, we're so thankful, thank you. He spits into the vial and he's happy. And then we asked him, okay, let's continue the study. And what happens, and they're doing it on a lab computer, mind you, it was actually in my room and a research assistant was next to it, so it sounded like Skinner, as a social scientist who stands there in the lab, very respectful, and the student is there. So there's a research assistant, there's the student, the room is secluded, and they start doing the survey online, and suddenly the screen freezes, and they see this. And this says in Hebrew, with Cyrillic letters in the middle to look more authentic, we are anonymous, your information belongs to all of us, to all. Even what's in your computer, it's with mistakes in grammar on purpose. We don't forgive and we don't forget. In a few more seconds, we're even going to hack your cellular phone. Expect us. And the students were required to leave their cell phones on vibrate on the table. And we knew the numbers of the cell phones, right? To confirm that they're coming to the experiment just for that reason. After a few seconds, and again, some people see this and they're saying, what is it? And again, the research assistant comes and says, that's a fluke, that's a mistake, let me just clear it up. And only she can release it. It's a special combination of keys to release the screen. We release the screen and says, don't worry about it, it's a computer. Computers at the university, they are filled with viruses, just keep it up. I'm getting paid here, so keep it up. And they were paid, by the way, a sandwich. That was the compensation. Or a coffee or a sandwich for doing this. The research assistant got more money, not the students. We're not that cheap. Now, after a few minutes that they're continuing the survey, and again, questions irrelevant to our study completely, they're just filling time. We asked them, do you think Netanyahu is more attractive than this guy? Do you think our prime minister is less attractive than this guy? Just anything to fill up the time. So a few minutes later, the screen again becomes black, and it becomes like a Skype screen in which they see themselves live. It's themselves live, and a guy with a hoodie, and you hear clicking. Okay, and this is live, okay? By the way, this guy is a video. They don't know that, but it's a video, so it's the same guy for all of them. But they think it's live. And again, people are getting closer, distant. What is this? It's me. And no, don't worry about it. It's a mistake. Just calm down. Everything is okay. There was a protocol, by the way. The sentences are exactly the same for every case. The RA is saying exactly the same sentence. It's a script. You should calm down. This is a computer from the university. Things like this happen. You should continue the study. The study is important. You cannot quit in the middle. Blah blah blah. And after a few seconds more, they get a text. And the text is like this. Doron, this is anonymous Israel, you have been hacked. That's what they get in their personal phone. At that point, some of them were really, really scared. Like shit scared. Like, I'm calling the police scared. We had a guy who insisted he wants to go out of the room and call the police. And we had to calm him down and say, well, finish the study and then call the police. Okay, so again, things like this happen all the time. People get, about ransom, computer hacking. You get people that steal your information, and so forth. And we want to see what's the impact on the individual. For instance, are you more willing after this to not just attack the person who attacked you with cyber attack, what should be the response for this? Shall we attack Syria with missiles, with cyber, both? And what we saw, and the most important finding here, I won't go into attitudinal items, but you can see that people are really stressed. As I said, cortisol is diurnal, so it should go down naturally from the moment we started the survey. This is 45 minutes per student. So it should go down significantly in 45 minutes for the control group, which is completely natural. But this is completely unnatural because it should be, this is really a spike. It shows that people are really, really stressed about this attack. So I think this is an important lesson for policymakers, because policymakers until now never thought about the individual, never thought about actually not the victims of somebody dying in an incubator in a hospital, just the regular people that are affected by the cyber attack and what it can do. Can you imagine this taking place for 2 days in which you don't have access to your data, your hard drive is erased for some reason, or you cannot access it? What would happen to people now that they're storing here their bank accounts, their images of their babies, and they have no backup because there's always no backup with your babies at first, right? And they're going to be stressed. And policymakers should know what it makes people think and believe, because they're going to, if there's a riot and people go to the streets with a riot, the crowd may demand justice, and that justice is something that perhaps countries don't want to get into. It's going to force perhaps Netanyahu to go into a war that most people don't want. But it's because people want blood and they are stressed, he will have to act upon the data or the sentiment. Okay? So on this note, I'll just tell you it's not that complicated to do. That's the nice thing about experiments. It takes a lot of time to get things right and the measures to be right, but this is something that doesn't cost a lot of money. This is something that we did on a budget that's perhaps, I don't know, the whole study was $2,000, all of it, okay, with the compensation for the students. So it's something that can be done as a PhD project easily. Okay. Questions? No, we're running out of time, but yeah.
To what extent do you think that such techniques or experiments are really used in political marketing nowadays?
Oh, everywhere. Political marketing, I can tell you as somebody, my dissertation was on campaign consultants in America. So I can tell you that, for instance, right now, ads, especially negative ads, are being tested like trailers. I don't know if you know, but many of the innovations in marketing come from actually the non-political area, from marketing, for instance, of trailers. So in trailers today, when you have trailers for a movie, and it's a scary movie like It, the clown that... So they do not just testing it in a lab. They used to do it like they would bring 12 people to a focus group and they would measure people reaction. You were scared. You were really, really scared. They don't. It's not anymore like that. What people do, they're doing fMRIs in which they bring people to watch the trailers under an fMRI. They're scanning their activity and they're looking at the amygdala. And the amygdala is the place. If you know your comics, you remember the Green Giant Hulk. So Hulk gets green when his amygdala becomes bombarded with neutrons. So the amygdala is targeted in those ads in which people are saying, okay, I want to scare people that if Hillary gets elected, there's going to be, I don't know, social democrats are going to become, America's going to be communistic. How can I create an image like that? And people are shooting those ads. They're trying it on fMRIs these days. Because it's only $100 to run an hour fMRI. It's very cheap these days in comparison to the past. So for like $2,000, I can have 20 respondents look at if they're really scared. If they're really scared, that's the ad I'm going to use. So people are using it, yes, on campaigns. Negative ads are using fMRIs even. So we're at that point. It's very scientific. They want to scare the hell out of you. Because in campaigning, the best sentiment to work with are either hate, which is politically correct, problematic, especially in America, But fear is much easier to manipulate. Because fear is natural. She's going to take the money from all of you and redistribute it. And yeah. So, and this is not just in America. I saw a study, it was done in Mexico in the last election. fMRIs were done in the last election in Mexico. La Peña, others. Yeah. So it's just a matter of sophistication. Yeah, so we're getting there. So it's not just Cambridge Analytica and the Russians, it's everywhere.
Could you add something optimistic?
Well, the optimistic side of it is that we know what they're doing. And we know to point it out. So on an optimistic note, for instance, Tali Mandelberg, she's a political scientist at Princeton. And Tali, what she's doing is she's using the same techniques that they're using to scare people, with only one difference. Before the ad airs, she tells them this ad is intended to scare you, or intended to raise you to hate blacks. And once you say that preamble before the ad, it doesn't work. So many ads that were used to help George Herbert Bush in 1998, they used a black person who was in prison and he got a furlough, a vacation, and he raped and killed a woman and came back. So it was very famously used in '88. So when she used that same ad and told people, this is about blacks, and the ad had no effect whatsoever. So that's good news. So I can educate the public, and right now actually we're with my brother-in-law, we're just finishing writing a grant in which we're going to ask for assistance to build news that are less stressful. Conveying the same information, we want to show that we are able to convey the same information, the same kind of level of engagement, but without freaking people out and getting almost the same rating. So we're trying to do that for the next year. Hopefully we'll be able to do it. So you could, again, it's I see this as a very part of our job is not just to find the answers, but also sometimes to come up with solutions. So I think that's part of the solution as social science advances forward. Well, thank you. If you have any questions after that, feel free, email me, send me a pigeon, text me, whatever. Okay, thanks.